The hidden language being silence.
When he ignores you, your heart tightens, your mind overflows with assumptions, and silence screams louder than any word. But what if this distance is actually a silent declaration of love? Could what appears to be indifference actually be hiding a deep psychological battle that he himself doesn't fully understand? In this exploration, we will reveal why a man in love can paradoxically withdraw and ignore you. We will delve into the unconscious forces that drive him, the reflections of the feminine archetype he carries, the anima, and his instinctual fear of being consumed by the very thing he desires most. Carl Jung's analytical psychology will be our guide in understanding how love awakens not only the light but also the shadow. If you've ever wondered why he remains silent, prepare yourself. The answers lie deeper than you think, both within him and within you.
Projection, the mirror of the soul.
Carl Jung's analytical psychology offers us a powerful key to understanding contradictory behaviors, especially in romantic relationships. When a loving man distances himself or ignores you, it is often not a sign of simple indifference but rather an unconscious reaction to internal forces beyond his control. Jung speaks of the mechanism of projection. We project a part of ourselves, which we are not yet aware of, onto another. When in love, a man frequently projects his anima, the feminine archetype of his soul, onto the woman. The woman unconsciously becomes the embodiment of everything the man seeks, fears, and wishes to integrate. This process can be overwhelming. He may withdraw when he confronts his own shadow, his fears, traumas, and insecurities. True love triggers the journey of individuation, which requires confronting the unconscious and integrating both its luminous and rejected aspects. In this context, ignoring becomes a defense mechanism, not because he doesn't care, but because he cares too much and doesn't know how to handle the transformation that this love demands of him. Distance often reflects the internal conflict between the desire for union with the other and the fear of losing identity. His silence should be seen not as a sign of rejection but as a possible indication that the relationship is touching deep layers. The integration of the anima in the man and the shadow in the woman, or vice versa, are important steps towards a real encounter, not an idealized one. If he loves you but ignores you, perhaps he is facing the greatest challenge of the psychological journey he has embarked upon to be able to love without losing himself.
The awakening of the shadow, love's dark face.
Love, especially that which touches the depths of the soul, is not only an experience of joy and connection but also an intense mirror reflecting our hidden parts. Carl Jung warns us that everything in our unconscious, especially in our most intimate relationships, manifests in the external world. When a man truly loves, this feeling can trigger not only his desires and dreams but also his deepest wounds, traumas, and fears. This is his shadow. According to Jung, the shadow represents everything that has been suppressed or rejected throughout life. Impulses, emotions, and various aspects of the self pushed into the unconscious because they don't fit the ideal self-image. When this man encounters a woman who awakens genuine feelings in him, he unconsciously begins to project onto her both his light and his darkness. This is a natural psychic process. However, it requires maturity to be understood and integrated. This is why he often withdraws instead of getting closer. True love doesn't just invite surrender, it also demands deep transformation. It's as if his soul knows that to be able to love fully, he must face everything he has avoided throughout his life. The fear of losing himself in the other, the fear of losing control that comes with abandoning the defenses he has built throughout a lifetime, can become stronger than the desire for connection. That is why he distances himself. The urge to ignore, isolate, or even act cold can be an unconscious attempt to protect the identity that is starting to crumble under the threat of love.
When love activates the shadow, the man finds himself on the edge of an inner abyss.
He must choose between confronting his wounds or holding on to the safety of the known and perhaps painful but familiar. Since most people are not emotionally ready for this confrontation, they ultimately choose to flee. In this context, silence, lack of contact, and apparent indifference are not necessarily reflections of a lack of love. On the contrary, They may indicate that what he feels has awakened something so deep that he doesn't yet know how to handle it. While this withdrawal can be painful for the receiving party, it is also a call, an invitation for both individuals to look within and recognize what this connection is reflecting for them.
The woman's perspective, transforming pain into opportunity.
For the woman who feels neglected, the pain can be devastating, especially if she is projecting her own idealizations and unresolved needs onto the man. However, understanding this process can transform the experience. When the woman realizes that his withdrawal might be the result of an inner confrontation with his own shadow, she stops personalizing the abandonment and begins to see the psychological dynamics behind his behavior. It's important to remember that true love is a journey of individuation, a process where both partners are invited to become more authentic versions of themselves. If the bond is deep, it will inevitably awaken childhood wounds, inherited patterns, and defenses built for survival. And this is necessary, because without crisis, there is no transformation. That is why when he shows love and then ignores you, perhaps he is internally struggling with the fear of losing himself in you, with the fear of dissolving in a surrender that demands more than he can offer at that moment. What he is truly afraid of is not the relationship itself, but what the relationship awakens within him. The need for change, the need for healing, and the need for the integration of his own shadow. This is both the beauty and the pain of this love. It touches the soul not only to unite but also to reveal, and we are not always ready to see what will be revealed. However, by understanding the psychological root of this behavior, you gain power. Not the power to control the other, but the courage to position yourself with awareness, compassion, and choice in the face of pain.
Anima Projection, the power of the inner feminine.
Carl Jung defined the anima as the feminine archetype present in a man's soul. It is an inner image that shapes how he perceives and relates to women. It is formed by emotional experiences in childhood, especially with feminine figures such as the mother. The anima represents much more than an idealization. It is the gateway to the integrity of the male soul. However, when a man is not yet conscious of his anima, he projects it onto the women he is in relationship with. This leads to relationships marked by illusions, expectations, and deep disappointments. When a man loves you and at the same time withdraws, he is often confronting this anima projection. In your person, you represent everything that is mysterious, sensitive, and emotional for him, everything he was never encouraged to recognize or develop within himself. The woman becomes a mirror of his most vulnerable and repressed parts. This contact both attracts him and at the same time threatens him. Such intense contact with the inner feminine can be overwhelming for a masculine ego that has learned to value control, reason, and emotional distance as signs of strength. The anima is not just a romantic or idealized image, it also carries emotional chaos, the desire for merging, intuition, and sensitivity, forces that, when not understood, create confusion and fear. Therefore, the love he feels for you can be a gateway to that forgotten dimension of the soul, and at the same time a trigger for an inner crisis. When he looks at you, he doesn't just see you, he sees everything he desires, fears, and never knew how to name. This projection can be fascinating at first. He puts you on a pedestal, seeing you as unique, perfect, almost magical. However, as your humanity emerges in the process of living together, the projection begins to dissolve, and then disappointment sets in. Not because you've changed, but because you were never what he projected onto you. What he loved was not something to be sought outside, but an inner image that needed to be integrated within himself.
The wounded man, the source of emotional disconnection.
The wounded man is the one disconnected from his sensitivity, who had to swallow his tears, who learned that vulnerability is weakness. When this man projects his feelings onto a woman, he approaches the most sacred part of his soul. But he doesn't have the emotional tools required to deal with it. It's like opening a door to a universe he never explored, and that universe overwhelms him. He feels small, lost, confused, and that's why he runs away. The pain of his withdrawal can be immense for the person on the receiving end, but his pain is also real. It is simply hidden in silence. The pain of not knowing who he is, of not understanding his emotions, of not being able to truly connect with something that goes beyond logic. He loves you, but he is also afraid of you. Not for who you are, but for what you represent. A call to transformation. It is important to realize that this dynamic is not your fault. You didn't cause his crisis. But with this awareness, you can choose what to do. Instead of trying to save him, fix him, or convince him to return, perhaps the most powerful action is to give him the time and space he needs to face his own journey. In the meantime, you can also reflect on your own projections. What did you expect him to be? What role did he fulfill in your soul? Love is not just a meeting of bodies, it is a reflection of souls. Understanding the anima and its role in male psychology allows us to see the withdrawal not as a rejection but as a moment of inner crisis, a call for each person to reintegrate their own lost parts and perhaps, one day, reunite, not as projected myths, but as whole human beings. The psychology of ignoring. When a man loves you and yet ignores you, his behavior may seem irrational. However, seen through the lens of Jungian analytical psychology, the act of ignoring is not mere neglect or indifference. It is often a psychic defense against things within himself that he has not yet integrated. To understand this behavior, we must look beyond the surface and acknowledge the unconscious mechanisms at play in the male soul when it encounters the impact of a deep connection.
True love is transformative.
It often breaks down the inner structures built over a lifetime, based on emotional suppression, rigid masculine patterns, and the fear of surrender and vulnerability. When a man finds himself in a relationship that requires emotional presence, vulnerability, and authenticity, his internal system may react with resistance. In this context, ignoring is not just an escape, but also an unconscious attempt to maintain control over an internal reality that is beginning to collapse. Jung teaches us that the unconscious is dynamic and, when not integrated, manifests as contradictory attitudes and defensive behaviors. Withdrawal, silence, sudden coldness, these are expressions of internal conflict. He doesn't know how to express what he feels because perhaps he hasn't yet fully learned to feel. For many men, the emotional language was silenced at an early age. That's why when love knocks on the door and brings with it the need for genuine connection, he shuts down. His defense is silence. His strategy is to escape. It is common for this type of man to have identified with the archetype of the strong, rational hero throughout his life. For him, showing vulnerability is a threat to his sense of identity. He fears dissolving in the relationship, being invaded by emotions he cannot name, and being dependent on something he cannot control. And that is why he ignores you even while loving you, because true love requires surrender, and this can be the opposite of what he was taught as a man.
Archetypal hero and the dance of shadow.
This emotional ignorance is also fueled by the hidden side of the personality that Jung called the shadow. Everything that is rejected, judged, or not accepted by the conscious mind is pushed into the unconscious and emerges unexpectedly in moments of crisis. The masculine shadow can include elements such as the fear of abandonment, insecurity, suppressed anger, neediness, jealousy, vulnerability, and when true love activates these emotions, he finds himself confronting parts of himself he doesn't recognize. Silence becomes a way to avoid shattering. On the other hand, the act of ignoring can also carry a symbolic meaning. In some archetypal traditions, the hero must go through a desert, an exile, or a period of distance before he can rediscover himself. In this sense, withdrawal can be an unconscious inward movement, a way of reorganizing one's inner world to understand what is happening, to name what is felt. However, when this process remains unconscious, he doesn't know how to communicate it, and the woman only feels abandoned. This is where many relationships break down. The woman feels the pain of silence as a reflection of her own inadequacy, while she is caught in a process that belongs more to the man than to her. By realizing this, she can break the cycle of pain and reaction. Instead of frantically seeking answers or begging for attention, she can turn inward and reflect on what this behavior awakens within her. The key here is awareness. Jung said that everything that is not brought to consciousness manifests in life as fate. If the man doesn't understand why he withdraws, why he ignores, why he cannot sustain the love he feels, he will continue to repeat this pattern in all his relationships. And if the woman doesn't understand what this means, she risks harming herself by trying to fix the other. In this context, ignoring is a cry from the unconscious, a plea for time, space, and silence so that something internal can reorganize itself. It is not easy for the one who feels, waits, and loves. However, understanding this behavior as part of a deeper dynamic can transform pain into wisdom. Most importantly, it allows love to remain, even when not reciprocated as expected, and enables this situation to serve as a mirror for both of them to grow. The awakened woman, from pain to wisdom. Faced with the silence of a man who loves but withdraws, the woman often finds herself in an emotional whirlwind. Doubt, feelings of rejection, insecurity, anger, neediness. However, within this pain lies a hidden invitation, a call to consciousness. Jung says that at the core of every meaningful encounter lies an opportunity for individuation, the process of transforming into who you truly are by integrating your inner polarities. And it is precisely at this point that the other's silence can be a gateway to self-knowledge. The awakened woman is not the one who doesn't feel pain, but the one who chooses not to lose herself in the pain. When she understands that the man's behavior is a reflection of a broader unconscious dynamic and not a definitive measure of her own worth, she withdraws her energy from the wound and repositions her center of power. Realizing that true love begins within and the other is merely a mirror, not the source of her wholeness. What was once unbearable silence now becomes an opportunity for inner listening. Instead of asking, "Why is he ignoring me?" the awakened woman asks herself, "What is this absence trying to show me about myself?" This shift in focus is profound because instead of seeking emotional validation in the other, she begins to observe her own vulnerabilities, attachment patterns, idealized fantasies of love, and fears of abandonment. And in doing so, she initiates the healing process. This woman doesn't try to force answers or chase after someone who is distancing himself. She understands that his silence speaks of an inner process that only he can resolve, and she respects this, not as a form of passivity, but as an act of self-love.
The power of inner transformation.
His withdrawal, paradoxically, can create the necessary space for the woman to return to herself, to strengthen her identity, and to rewrite her emotional story from a more mature and conscious place. The awakened woman also recognizes her own shadow. Just as the man projected his anima onto her, she realizes that she might have projected onto the man, perhaps the absent father, the idealized savior, or the partner who should fill her voids. By bringing these images into the light of consciousness, she is no longer a hostage to unconscious patterns and begins to make clearer, freer choices. She is no longer just a half-seeking completion but becomes whole. Turning silence into awareness requires courage. It's easier to blame. It's simpler to label the other as cold, immature, or cowardly. It's harder to look within and realize how much this silence awakens old pains that are still alive. But the woman's true strength is born in this confrontation. It is not a dominating, manipulating, or imposing power. It is a power that embraces, observes, and transforms. The awakened feminine is receptive, but not passive. She is sensitive, but not so vulnerable that she gets lost. She is deep, but knows how to protect herself. She knows when to persist and when to let go. She understands that true love is not about holding on but about liberating, and that is why even when faced with absence, she does not dissolve, she expands. The birth of authentic power. When the woman enters this state of consciousness, the relational dynamic changes completely. The man, still stuck in his inner conflicts, feels this change and often finds himself affected by it. This silent yet resolute presence can awaken the desire in him to look within and understand what he has lost in order to evolve. Rarely, perhaps. But this is neither guaranteed nor should it be her goal. True transformation occurs when she stops living according to his reaction and starts living according to her own truth. The awakened woman knows that she deserves a love that doesn't silence or confuse her. Yet, she also understands that the maturation process of others is often slow, and it is not within her power to rush or guide this journey. Her role is to stay true to herself, to nourish her soul, to grow through her experiences, and to wisely choose what is worthy of her presence. Thus, the man's silence ceases to be a punishment. It becomes a teacher. Not a judgment, but a mirror. And she moves forward not as someone who runs from pain, but as someone who knows that pain is a part of the journey but not the final destination.
The true face of love, transformation and integration.
Love is not just an encounter, it is a revelation. And when he ignores you even while loving you, perhaps he is in conflict with parts of himself he doesn't know. His silence speaks of an inner universe with an unintegrated anima, unhealed wounds, disorganization, everything he doesn't yet understand about himself that confronts him through the reflected anima.
And on the other side, you carry the pain of feeling invisible.
But you also have the chance to transform this pain into awareness. Jung taught us that true union exists only when there is integration. He must find his own truth, and your love begins to transform from an escape into a presence when that presence chooses to return to itself. Only then can it flourish. This transformation is a long process where both sides come to terms with their own inner worlds, reclaim their projections, and learn to see each other in their true forms.
Conclusion: from silence to understanding.
In this complex dance of love, silence and distance can sometimes be the most powerful form of communication. While the man withdraws, trying to get lost in his own spiritual geography, the woman can use this absence as an opportunity to explore her own inner world. This process is difficult and transformative for both sides. However, within this difficulty, both carry the potential to become more whole, more conscious, and more authentic individuals. Love, after all, is not the union of two halves that complete each other, but the conscious coming together of two whole human beings. With this understanding, his silence is no longer a loss, but becomes a door opening to a deeper understanding for both yourself and him. And perhaps, after this silence, both can come together again as stronger, more conscious individuals who can truly see each other. Ultimately, as Jung taught us, most of the deepest love stories begin with silence, that silence in which we learn to hear our own inner voice. This silence may not be a lost opportunity, but the sacred space necessary for both souls to mature. Additional perspectives: Jungian approach in modern relationships.
Love and distance in the digital age.
In today's fast-paced, technology-focused world, the dynamics Jung's analytical psychology predicted have become even more complex. Social media, the expectation of constant communication, and instant gratification culture have further narrowed the space men need for their internal processes. When a man tries to confront his unconscious conflicts, the technological noise around him can complicate this process. Expressing the need for silence, withdrawal, and solitude with his inner world has become more difficult in the modern world. In this situation, rather than interpreting his withdrawal from the digital world, late responses to messages, or no responses at all as personal rejection, the woman might interpret it as perhaps a need for a kind of digital detox. Generational differences and emotional expression. Jung's theories also offer valuable perspectives in understanding the emotional expression styles of men from different generations. Men from generations who experienced emotional distance from their fathers may have more difficulty connecting with their own emotional worlds. For these men, love is also a struggle to break emotional patterns that have been passed down through generations. Their withdrawal may not only be a personal defense mechanism, but also part of an effort to overcome emotional barriers inherited from family legacy. Cultural factors and masculine identity. The way masculine identity is defined in different cultures significantly affects men's reactions to love. While emotional expression is more accepted in some cultures, in others men are expected to be strong and distant. These cultural pressures make the Anima Projection Jung described even more complex. The man conflicts not only with his own inner world, but also with societal expectations. This dual struggle can reinforce withdrawal behavior.
Trauma and attachment styles.
Modern psychology research supports Jung's theories from an attachment styles perspective. Men with avoidant attachment styles may experience the dynamics Jung described more intensely. Childhood traumas, neglect, or inconsistent care increase the tendency to withdraw in adult relationships. In this case, love's need for closeness can simultaneously trigger old wounds. Treatment and healing process. The Jungian approach offers a hopeful path to healing for men in this situation. Through individual therapy, group therapy, or couples therapy, men can establish a healthy relationship with their anima and do shadow work. What's important in this process is allowing the man to progress at his own pace and respecting his inner journey rather than trying to change him. For female partners, it's also important to work on reclaiming their own projections and developing their own sense of completeness. Healthy relationship dynamics. From a Jungian perspective, a healthy relationship is one where both partners have completed their individuation processes or are at least conscious about this. In this case, love becomes not a search for completing missing parts, but the conscious union of two whole beings. In such relationships, conflicts and withdrawals may still occur, but they become transformative rather than destructive. Both partners respect each other's inner processes and take responsibility for their own development.